All right, get ready because today we are going deep, deep into, well, a topic that some folks might find a little bit, well, surprising.
Oh, and what's that?
We're talking sex magic.
Okay, sure. Lots of folks associate that with, I don't know, Aleister Crowley maybe, or like the modern occult scene, but
Exactly, but we're not starting there.
no.
Nope, we're going way, way back. Back to the roots of this, well, practice. In Western occultism, that is.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I'm ready.
You ready?
Yeah.
Buckle up.
All right.
So we're using this book as our main source, Sexuality, Magic, and Perversion.
Okay, by Francis King, right?
Yes, by Francis King. And it really kind of, I don't know, it illuminates some really fascinating historical connections.
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff.
So where should we start this journey?
Well, I think we got to start with a name that you might not associate with spiritual enlightenment.
Okay, I'm listening.
Edward Sellin, a Victorian pornographer.
Wait, hold on. A what?
A pornographer. But not just that. He was actually a key figure in introducing tantric practices to the West.
Hold on. A pornographer, that's not exactly the first thing that pops into my head when I think, mystical gurus and ancient wisdom.
I know. But Sellin, well, he was kind of a Renaissance man. I mean, he was a soldier, a coach driver, a fencing master.
Wow, okay.
And prolific writer of erotica.
Okay, so Victorian pornography with a little Eastern mysticism on the side.
Yeah, something like that. It gets pretty interesting. He actually traveled to India, became really fascinated by tantric traditions.
Oh, wow.
Get this, started putting these ideas into his, shall we say, unconventional works.
Okay, this is wild.
It is. What's really important, though, is that his writings, especially this book, The Ups and Downs of Life, it was his autobiography.
Okay.
They get us this really interesting glimpse into the underground occult scene in Victorian England.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, and they show us how these tantric ideas started, making their way into Western thought.
Now, I'm curious about Tantra and this connection to sex magic. Like, I get that Tantra is about utilizing sexual energy, but how does that actually work?
Well, the basic idea is that sexual energy is a very powerful force, and it can be channeled for spiritual growth and magical purposes, both in Buddhist and Hindu traditions, by the way.
Right.
And it's not just about the physical act, right? It's about viewing that energy as a source of transformation.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But didn't King's book say there is like a debate about the origins of Tantra itself?
Yeah, there is. It's kind of a chicken or the egg thing.
Right.
Like, which came first, Buddhist Tantra or Hindu Tantra? Some scholars think that both actually emerged from an even older tradition.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like an ancient Indian sexo-yogic practice.
So we're talking about practices that could, I don't know, maybe even predate organized religion as we know it.
It's possible, yeah.
But if Tantra is about harnessing this energy, like, how do practitioners interpret the actual practices that are described in these texts?
That is where things get really interesting, right? Because there's all this discussion about whether those descriptions, are they meant to be taken literally or are they symbolic?
Right, yeah, the classic debate, symbolism versus literalism in esoteric traditions.
Always seems to come up.
It never goes away.
Nope.
Isn't there a story about the Dalai Lama that touches on this?
There is. So the story goes that when people criticized his own sexual behavior, the Dalai Lama, he basically showed them just how much control he had over this energy.
Oh, wow.
In a very, shall we say, demonstrative way.
Okay.
It kind of highlights that, that tantric perspective, that sexual energy is meant to be understood, mastered, not, suppressed or rejected.
Yeah. Okay, so Tantra's got this, like, long and complex history, and its journey westward is just as fascinating. But I'm thinking, like, what about the ancient Western cultures? Did they have practices that, I don't know, resemble what we would call sex magic today?
Oh, they absolutely did. Think about like ancient fertility cults. King argues that, they share some really striking similarities with modern sex magic. Specifically, the idea of, harnessing sexual energy to influence the natural world.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing this connection between human vitality and the forces of nature.
So it's not just about personal transformation.
No.
It's about tapping into something, I don't know, primal, powerful, something that links us to the rhythms of the earth.
Exactly. And King actually points out four core characteristics of these ancient fertility religions. Duality, cyclical time, personalized nature, and the law of cause and effect. These were really, I don't know, central to their rituals and beliefs.
Okay, can we break those down a bit?
Yeah.
What do those characteristics actually mean in practice?
Sure, yeah. So duality, that refers to the recognition of opposing forces,
Yeah.
like male and female, light and dark,
Okay.
and how their interplay is really essential for balance, for creation.
Right. And cyclical time. I'm guessing that's seeing time as a circle rather than a straight line.
You got it. Think about the seasons, the cycles of the moon, the ebb and flow of life itself.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that everything, it moves in cycles. It's constantly renewing itself.
Okay. What about personalized nature? Does that mean seeing nature as like a conscious being?
Exactly. It's that nature isn't just this collection of objects. It's a living, breathing entity,
Okay.
populated by spirits and deities, and humans can interact with them.
Okay. And the law of cause and effect.
Well, that one's, yeah, pretty straightforward. Actions have consequences, both in the physical and spiritual realms. Rituals and offerings were a way to influence these forces, right? To bring about the outcomes you wanted.
So how did all of this actually play out in like the ancient rituals? Were there specific deities or symbols?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like the classic archetypes.
Okay.
The Sky Father and the Earth Mother.
Right, definitely.
Think about, Zeus and Hera in Greek mythology, Jupiter and Juno for the Romans.
Right.
Their union was, well, it was seen as this reflection of this cosmic dance of energies. And their symbolism, it was everywhere.
Right.
From the religious festivals to, like, agricultural practices.
It's amazing to think that these ancient beliefs could still have some influence on modern cult practices. Do we see those echoes today?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A modern occultist might use those same principles, invoking certain deities, using symbolic offerings, incorporating, focused intention, all that in a ritual that's designed to, I don't know, like bring rain during a drought. The methods might change, but the core ideas, they stay the same.
Yeah, it's like this thread connecting us back to the past.
Yeah.
But what happened to all these practices when Christianity started to become more prominent? Did they just disappear?
Well, I mean, Christianity, it's all about monotheism.
Right.
And they've got a pretty, well, shall we say, complex relationship with sexuality.
Right.
A lot of these pagan traditions, they got suppressed, right? They were driven underground. But they didn't exactly vanish completely.
Oh, I bet.
No, remnants of these beliefs, they kind of persisted in folklore. Witchcraft accusations.
Okay.
And even, and you might not believe this, within the church itself.
Wait, within the church itself?
Yeah. Think about the cult of Saints Cosmo and Damiano.
Okay.
Their veneration involved rituals that today, well, they seem to blur the lines between, religious devotion and sexual symbolism.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it seems the more we, kind of dig into this, the more we realize just how deeply embedded these ideas really are in our history.
Oh, for sure. And it's not just, grand ceremonies and complex theologies. King even mentions, get this, the dildo.
Really?
And how it fits into this whole story.
The dildo, I got to hear this.
Well, it's an object with a surprisingly long and complex history.
Oh, I bet.
He traces it all the way back to ancient fertility rituals. And, he explores how it later on became associated with witchcraft and secret sexual practices. I mean, it's an object that's always kind of been right there on that line between, taboo and fascination.
Okay, so sex magic was driven underground, but it didn't completely disappear. Was there a specific moment, a movement maybe that kind of sparked its resurgence in the West?
Well, there were a few key factors.
Okay.
Scholars like Richard Payne Knight and Thomas Wright.
Okay.
They rekindled this interest in, well, priapic worship and the sexual magic of, ancient Europe. This was in the 18th and 19th centuries. Their work, it really paved the way for this whole new wave of occultists to explore these kind of forbidden topics.
So it started with academics rediscovering these like ancient practices.
Yeah, pretty much. And their work actually influenced occultists like Hargrave Jennings.
Okay.
He saw these connections between, well, these ancient symbols and practices.
Right.
And, these esoteric traditions like Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism.
Now, those are names that, ring a bell.
Right.
Groups that are often associated with, Western occultism.
Exactly. And these groups, they played a role in, well, transmitting and reinterpreting ancient knowledge through this distinctly esoteric lens.
Which, of course, leads us to the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO.
Right.
The group that is, most associated with Aleister Crowley.
Of course.
And his, well, unique approach to sex magic.
Exactly, exactly. But before we get to Crowley, it's important to remember that, the OTO, it's a lot older than most people realize.
Oh, that's right. King's book mentions a man named Karl Kellner as the founder.
Yeah.
Who was he? What were his ideas about sex magic?
Well, Kellner, he was a wealthy German industrialist and a, dedicated occultist. He had these ties to Freemasonry, and he claimed that the OTO's teachings on, sex magic, that they were, derived from ancient sources, Arab and Hindu traditions.
So even the OTO, with its, later notoriety, it drew inspiration from older practices.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's this speculation that Kellner was also influenced by an American occultist.
Oh.
Haskell Beverly Randolph. He had a pretty devoted following in Europe.
Randolph, another name I haven't heard before. What was his contribution?
Randolph he was a fascinating figure. He was a mulatto who, he faced a lot of prejudice during his lifetime. He kept his teachings on sex magic, kind of shrouded and all the symbolism. Even some of his closest associates, they didn't even know the true nature of his practices.
So even within these occult circles, there were levels of secrecy and hidden knowledge.
Oh yeah, it speaks to that balance, between preserving that esoteric knowledge and navigating those social and moral constraints of the time.
Yeah, I get that. So how was the OTO structured? I mean, what kind of practices did they actually engage in?
Well, they were organized into 9 operative grades.
Okay.
With a 10th administrative grade that was, it was reserved for national leaders. The first 6, they focused on, traditional Masonic symbolism and ritual.
Okay, and the higher grades, what did those involve?
Those dealt specifically with sex magic.
Okay.
With, written instructions that were given to initiates. The 8th degree, that's a unique form of, autosexual practice.
Autosexual, so solo practices. Interesting. So it wasn't all, couples or group ritual.
Right, right. It shows how diverse, the practices were within these sex magic traditions.
King also mentioned something about talismans being used.
Yeah, yeah.
How did those fit in?
Well, the idea was to imbue the talisman with magical power.
Okay.
By focusing your intention and specific bodily fluids during the sexual act.
Okay.
Different fluids, they held different, symbolic meanings and were believed to carry different types of, energy.
Okay, things are getting a little more graphic here.
Yeah.
But it sounds like these practices, they weren't taken lightly.
No, definitely not. Even Crowley himself, he owned a talisman that had been, consecrated this way.
Wow. Okay. So Kellner, he died in 1905.
Right.
What happened to the OTO then? I'm guessing this is where Aleister Crowley comes into the picture.
He does. But before we get to Crowley and the rise of Baphomet, I think it's worth taking a moment to just, think about what we've already uncovered.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone from Victorian pornography to, ancient fertility cults, secret societies. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I have a feeling we're just getting started.
We are. So yeah, after Karl Kellner died, the OTO, they found themselves under the leadership of Theodore Reus.
Okay.
And, this is where Aleister Crowley kind of enters the picture.
Yes. Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed wickedest man in the world. His name's pretty much, synonymous with sex magic.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, Crowley's involvement with the OTO really, it brought that whole concept, sex magic, into the public eye.
Right. Didn't King mention that libel case?
He did.
Back in 1911?
Yeah.
That kind of hinted at, Crowley's more, shall we say, unconventional practices.
He did. That was the one with George Cecil Jones and DeWin Fenton. And, even though Crowley wasn't directly involved, it did expose his connection to the OTO and his fascination with sex magic.
So how did Crowley end up, leading the OTO?
Well, Reus, he was the head honcho at the time.
Right.
He saw something in Crowley. His charisma, his intellect, his willingness to, push boundaries.
Yeah.
Those qualities made him, I guess you'd say a perfect fit for the OTO's, esoteric leanings.
Crowley was never one to shy away from, controversy. He seemed to kind of, revel in challenging societal norms.
He did. But beneath all the, the theatrics, there was a brilliant mind at work.
Right.
Reus, he appointed Crowley the head of the British branch of the OTO.
Wow.
And even gave him this grand title, King of Ireland, Iona, and all the Britons within the sanctuary of the Gnosis.
Wow, that's quite a title.
Good.
So Crowley takes over the British branch. Did he just, I don't know, continue Kellner's teachings, or did he bring his own, ideas to the table?
Crowley was never one to just, follow the crowd.
Right.
He took that existing OTO framework, right, and kind of infused it with his own blend of, well, philosophy, practice, drew from sources like, the Egyptian Book of the Dead,
Okay.
his own personal, mystical experiences.
Didn't King mention something about a verse ritual
He did.
that Crowley created?
Yeah.
Like a prelude to the sexual practices of the ninth degree. That sounded intense.
Oh, it was. It was. The rituals got all this, well, symbolism, invocations to various deities,
Right.
Nuit and Hadit. They're central figures in Crowley's system of magic. And these invocations, they were performed while focusing on specific points, on the body.
Okay.
They were seen as gateways for these energies to, well, enter.
Nuit and Hadit. I'm not familiar with those names.
Well, Nuit, she represents the infinite expanse of the cosmos, the feminine principle.
Okay.
And Hadit, he represents the point within that infinity, the masculine principle. Their union is seen as, well, the source of all creation.
So it's about uniting those opposing forces.
Yeah.
Kind of like that duality we were talking about earlier, the Sky Father and the Earth Mother.
Exactly. Exactly. Recurring theme in a lot of spiritual and magical traditions. Crowley, he believed that by aligning yourself with these cosmic forces, you could tap into this source of, I don't know, immense power.
Okay, so we've got lots of symbolism, lots of ritual, and it sounds like Crowley was pretty, well, theatrical in his approach.
Oh, absolutely. Crowley was, well, he was a master of drama, of ritual.
Right.
He understood the importance of creating a heightened atmosphere, to really facilitate these workings. It wasn't just about the physical act, right? It was about creating this sacred space, kind of like, a magical theater.
But with all this talk of power and ritual, I can't help but wonder about the ethical implications of all this. Crowley's been accused of all sorts of things.
Right.
Manipulating followers, engaging in dangerous and, exploitative practices.
It's true. Crowley's personal life was, well, colorful, to say the least. And some of his actions, definitely controversial. And yeah, the potential for abuse. It's always a concern when you're dealing with any system, right? That involves, power dynamics, sexual practices.
Didn't King mention Crowley's use of drugs?
He did.
In conjunction with the sex magic rituals? Was that common?
Well, Crowley experimented with, substances like hashish and peyote.
Okay.
He believed that certain drugs, if used in a, controlled ritual setting, they could help to expand consciousness,
Okay.
access deeper levels of, well, awareness.
I can see how that could get risky.
Oh, it can. It can. Crowley's experimentation with drugs definitely wasn't without its critics. And it's not something to be undertaken lightly.
Right. So Crowley's approach, it was very much his own.
It was.
It sounds like he, I don't know, kind of combined elements from all these different traditions and then added his own unique twist to everything.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. He wasn't just, following instructions. He was experimenting. He was innovating, pushing the boundaries of magical practice.
King also mentioned Crowley's fascination with music.
Oh, yeah.
And dance.
Uh-huh.
In his magical workings.
Yes, yes. Crowley, he saw music and dance as incredibly potent tools for, well, altering consciousness and invoking specific energies. He thought certain instruments like the organ, the violin, those were particularly suited for magical purposes. And King points out that, well, he had a particular fondness for the tom-tom.
The tom-tom.
Well,
that's not an instrument you usually associate with, high magic.
No, not really. But, well, Crowley's friend, Commander Marston, he was in the Royal Navy.
Okay.
He apparently conducted some interesting experiments with the tom-tom, looking at its effects on, well, English women.
Okay.
And let's just say the results kind of confirmed that, yeah, the tom-tom can evoke strong reactions.
Maybe we can just leave those details to the imagination. But going back to Crowley's magical workings, I remember reading something about an experiment. It involved, I think, the god Mercury.
Right, right. Crowley and Victor Newberg, they did this ritual to invoke Mercury. Crowley claimed that, well, he saw the whole room. It was just filled with caduceus, the symbol of Hermes.
Right.
But Newberg, he was acting as the medium in this whole thing.
Okay.
He didn't experience anything.
So kind of a mixed bag of results then.
Yeah, you could say that. Crowley, he figured that the lack of, well, results, it was because maybe Mercury was in a plankish mood, meaning he was prone to, I don't know, playing cranks.
Right.
Or maybe Newberg just wasn't receptive enough.
So even the gods have their off days.
Maybe. Or
Yeah.
maybe Mercury just wasn't impressed.
Yeah, could be. Could be.
But things took a bit of a darker turn in another working.
Oh.
An entity, and it might have been Mercury again. It's supposedly obsessed Crowley.
Oh, wow.
And instructed him to perform human sacrifice.
Whoa, hold on. Human sacrifice. That's taking things to a whole new level.
It is. But to be clear, both Crowley and Newberg, they dismissed the entity's instructions as, well, black magic.
Okay.
And they didn't act on them.
That's a relief, to say the least.
Yeah.
So they did have some ethical boundaries.
They did.
But Crowley's personal life, as we mentioned, was, well, pretty controversial.
Yeah.
He had lots of, relationships with students.
Right.
A lot of them homosexual. Was that something that the OTO, I don't know, condoned?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, Crowley, he was, bisexual.
Right.
And he didn't exactly shy away from, various forms of sexual expression.
Right.
But, we got to remember that these relationships, they happened in a particular time, a particular context.
Right.
It's not really our place to judge them by today's standards. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. It's easy to, get caught up in judging the past by our own modern sensibilities. So Crowley died in 1947.
Right.
What happened to the OTO then?
Well, after some internal, conflict and leadership disputes, a guy named Carl Germer, he was a close associate of Crowley's.
Okay.
He took over as the head of the order.
And how did Germer's leadership compare to Crowley's?
Yeah.
Did he continue that focus on sex magic?
Germer's approach, it was a lot more, subdued. He actually downplayed the sexual aspects of the OTO's teachings.
Oh, really?
Yeah, emphasized more, traditional mystical practices. Interestingly, he had his own, set of challenges. He was interned in a U.S. camp during World War II.
Oh, wow.
Because of his German citizenship.
So even occultists weren't immune to the political turmoil of the times?
No, unfortunately not. But despite those, setbacks, Germer, he managed to keep the OTO going. In a much quieter form, though. He continued to lead the order until he died in 1962. But remember how we were talking about the German branch of the OTO?
Yeah.
Well, during this time, there was a group, the Fraternidad Saturni, or the Brotherhood of Saturn. They were making their own, waves.
King described them as being, a bit more intense than the OTO.
Well, they were. The Fraternidad Saturni, they combined elements of sex magic with a heavy, heavy emphasis on astrology and drugs.
Astrology and drugs. Now, that's a combination I haven't heard before. How did those elements play into their practices?
Well, they believed that certain astrological alignments, they were, particularly conducive to magical workings.
Okay.
And that certain drugs, they could enhance the effectiveness of the rituals. They even came up with this whole system of sex magic based on planetary aspects. So, they guided their practices by the positions of the planets.
So they were bringing the cosmos into the bedroom, so to speak.
Exactly. It was a way of, aligning their personal energies with the larger cosmic forces.
Right.
And this approach, it resonated with a lot of people who were, interested in pushing the boundaries of, magical experimentation.
But this was all happening in Germany during, the rise of the Nazi Party.
Right.
How did a group like the Fraternidad Saturni, with its focus on occultism and, these unconventional practices, how did they survive in that kind of environment?
It was a very dangerous time for any group that, didn't conform to the Nazi ideology. They had to operate in secrecy.
Right.
A lot of their members faced persecution.
It's remarkable that even in the midst of, such political and social upheaval, there were still people who were seeking out, these alternative paths and exploring, the mysteries of sex magic.
It is. It shows you how, how deeply ingrained these desires are.
Yeah.
For, spiritual exploration, self-discovery, even in the face of adversity. And that brings us to the post-war era.
Okay.
And the evolution of, sex magic practices in the 20th century. We've got some more, fascinating figures and groups to explore, like the GBG, Bishop Leadbeater. There's even a connection to the modern Satanic Church.
Okay. I'm ready for the next part of the journey.
All right, let's do it.
All right, we're back. Still diving deep, deep into sex magic. We've traveled from ancient fertility cults all the way to the rise of the OTO.
Right, right. But the journey's not over yet.
Nope, not by a long shot.
Yeah.
In this last part, we're going to see how these ideas continue to evolve in the 20th century and even beyond.
What's really fascinating about this period is, well, how sex magic practices, they kind of branched out.
Yeah.
They intersected with all these, I don't know, different spiritual and philosophical movements. What? It's like this kaleidoscope of different approaches.
Yeah.
Each one with its own take on, harnessing this energy, this, powerful energy.
So King's book mentions this group called the GBG.
Yeah, the GBG.
Active in the U.S. mid-20th century. What were they all about?
Well, the GBG, it was a pretty secretive organization founded by this occultist named, Charles Stansfeld Jones. He went by, get this, Frederick Head.
Getchy.
Right. They incorporated sexual practices into their rituals.
Okay.
But their approach, it was, pretty unique. Drew inspiration from a blend of, Crowley's teachings, tantric traditions, even elements of Christian mysticism.
So a real mix of influences there.
Yeah.
What set them apart from the other groups?
Well, Jones, he was a bit of a visionary, always pushing the boundaries of, magical practice, developed his own system of sex magic, one that really emphasized, personal experience and direct connection with, the divine.
I'm curious about how they, recruited new members. Did they advertise these unconventional practices openly?
Believe it or not, they use ads in occult magazines.
Really?
Yeah, promising a shortcut to initiation.
Wow, that's one way to do it. But this was still a time when, talking about sex openly was very taboo. How'd they manage to operate without attracting too much, attention?
Secrecy.
Right.
Big time. New initiates, they had to go through this rigorous training process, things like dream journaling and solitary retreats, all that before they even learned about the group's sexual practices.
So they had to prove they were dedicated before they were let in on the secrets.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Speaking of secrets and controversies, didn't King's book also talk about that Bishop Leadbeater scandal in the Theosophical Society?
Yeah, Bishop Leadbeater. His story is a good reminder that, even within those spiritual movements, those that really emphasize enlightenment, higher consciousness, there can be shadows, Yeah.
Abuses of power.
For folks who don't know about the Theosophical Society, can you give us a little, background?
Sure. It was founded in the late 19th century. By Helena Blavatsky. Fascinating figure.
Right.
But a little, controversial, to say the least. The society, blended elements of, Eastern mysticism.
Okay.
Western esotericism.
Right.
And a little bit of Blavatsky's own interpretations of these, ancient texts.
So how did Bishop Leadbeater fit into all of this?
He was a prominent figure in the society, known for his clairvoyant abilities and his teachings on spiritual development. However, he was also accused of, engaging in inappropriate behavior with young boys.
And these accusations, did they involve, sex magic?
Well, not in the sense of, ritual practices, but the allegations. They revolved around mutual masturbation.
Oh, wow.
Which Leadbeater, he apparently justified as, some kind of, spiritual instruction.
That's definitely crossing a line. It raises these really serious questions about the potential for abuse.
Yeah.
Especially when you have that kind of power dynamic.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Leadbeater's case caused, a huge scandal within the Theosophical Society.
Right.
He was actually expelled. For a while, at least. But he was, later reinstated.
Wow.
And he continued to be an influential figure until he died in 1934.
It's a cautionary tale, for sure.
Yeah.
But switching gears a bit, didn't King also talk about Wilhelm Reich?
Yeah.
The psychoanalyst who had some interesting ideas about sexual energy. He developed a theory about, what was it called? Orgastic potency?
He did. Reich was, kind of a maverick in the field of psychoanalysis. He didn't really agree with some of Freud's core ideas and developed his own theories about libido, its importance for human well-being.
And how does his work, how does it connect to sex magic?
Well, Reich, he focused more on the therapeutic applications of sexual energy rather than, the magical potential. But his idea of orgastic potency, that ability to fully surrender to and release sexual energy, it really, it resonated. with some practitioners of sex magic.
So instead of using that energy to, I don't know, cast spells or summon spirits, it's about, using it for personal healing, growth.
Yeah, exactly. Reich, he believed that, a healthy, fulfilling sex life, it was crucial for psychological, even physical health.
Right.
He saw the repression of, well, sexual energy as like this root cause of so many neuroses, so many ailments.
It seems like, I don't know, there's this recurring theme here, this idea that, well, sexual energy, it's a powerful force that can be channeled in different ways.
Yeah.
Whether it's, spiritual transformation, influencing the natural world, or even just, improving your own well-being.
I think you've hit on something really important there. I mean, from those ancient fertility cults to modern occult groups, there's always this recognition that sexual energy is this primal force that we can, harness for different purposes. Personal, transpersonal.
And speaking of, powerful forces, we can't wrap this up without at least mentioning, I don't know, the modern satanic church.
Right.
King hinted that they're involved with sex magic.
He did. He pointed out that, the Church of Satan, the one promoted by, Anton LaVey.
Right.
It embraces a very, hedonistic philosophy. But there are all these rumors about a secret inner circle.
Yeah.
They engage in some form of sex magic.
So it's like this mystery within a mystery.
Yeah. Makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden beneath the surface, right?
It does. And it speaks to that, that enduring human fascination with the forbidden, the hidden. The idea that there's always deeper levels of knowledge, and practice reserved for a select few. Right. It's been a wild ride exploring this, the history, the evolution of sex magic in Western occultism. We've gone from Victorian pornographers to, ancient Greek myths to modern-day Satanists.
It's amazing, isn't it? What a fascinating, complex, tapestry of beliefs, practices.
It really is. And it leaves us with a question. In a world where sexuality, spirituality, and magic, they continue to intersect, to evolve, what are the potential benefits and risks of harnessing this potent force?
Yeah.
For personal and collective transformation?
That's a great question. One for all of us to think about as we continue, our own explorations.
It is. And on that thought-provoking note, I guess we come to the end of our deep dive. Keep digging, keep questioning, keep exploring, folks. There's always more to discover out there.